The victim group is constantly being searched for anew by the cultural Marxists. LGBTQIA plus, right? People's World uses that full label. The plus is really key,
Right.
as the champion victim group. So that would include lesbians, gays, bisexuals, transgender, queer persons, intersexual, asexuals, and on and on. Thus, a leading cultural Marxist like Angela Davis could stand at the 2017 Women's March in Washington, D.C., before a sea of oblivious girls wearing pink hats modeled after their genitalia and recite a litany of politically correct grievances.
Joyful, joyful Lord, we adore thee. God of glory, Lord of light.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse, founder and president of the Ruth Institute. Welcome to this edition of the Dr. J Show. My guest today is Dr. Paul Kenger from Grove City College and the author of numerous very interesting books having to do with communism and other forms of totalitarian ideology. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Paul, nice to have you on the show.
Jennifer, great to be with you. Thank you for all you do, your great books, your great writings, the Ruth Institute. Been a fan for a long time.
Well, thanks. We have kind of a mutual admiration society going. You've had me over to Grove City a couple times.
That's right. That's right.
Always a pleasure to be over there. Grove City College, for those of you who don't know, is one of a handful of colleges in the United States that does not take any federal money whatsoever. So it's 100% independent, and you can do what you think is right, you know, and you don't have to,
right.
You can be independent. So that's a great thing. So, you know, what prompted me to call you, Paul, about doing this interview is that you had an article about Teen Vogue, some outrageous thing that was going on in Teen Vogue. And I myself have had problems with Teen Vogue over the years, in the last 18 months or something like that. Just ridiculous things coming out of there. Tell people what Teen Vogue had to say that got you up in arms.
Yeah, so they did an article on about why Ronald Reagan is bad, basically, right?
Oh.
And why young people, despite what their parents said, and the fact that Ronald Reagan won 44 out of 50 states in 1980 and 49 out of 50 in 1984. By the way, none of those facts are actually in the article.
Oh,
right?
My goodness, no.
Because that might make the girls say, wow, that's pretty good. 49 out of 50 states, right? With a majority of registered Democrats. Wow, he just moved 525 to 13 in the Electoral College. Wow. But no, this article explained, no, really, Reagan was bad. Reagan was bad, and here's why you need to know. And it, among other things, it was hard on him, if not blaming him for AIDS, the AIDS crisis, for helping to create the environment for today, Black Lives Matter. And so just really bad, preposterous stuff. And yet, not that long ago, I can't remember exactly when this piece was, Jennifer, but they had a piece praising Karl Marx. So I called the piece, Teen Vogue to Teen Girls, Marx good, Reagan bad. And this is the same Teen Vogue that, and I know you know this because I think I probably read this when maybe you flagged it first a couple of years ago. They published a manual for anal sex for teen girls.
Right. What you need to know about anal sex is
right.
The title of the article was, and my answer, of course, is nothing. Nothing. You need to know nothing about this. Okay, so this is a magazine marketed to preteen girls, not even teens. Right.
That's right.
Preteen girls. They don't need to know anything about anal sex, you know.
No.
There you go. There's something weird about this publication. What's going on? But then, in your response to the Ronald Reagan piece, and by the way, Dr. Kenger has written biographies of Ronald Reagan, a joint biography of Reagan plus John Paul II. You know, so he knows what he's talking about. Everybody, just for your information.
At least I try to.
Yeah. You don't talk unless you know what you're talking about. You confine yourself to subjects you know something about. Then you mentioned Karl Marx. You said a little bit more about Karl Marx and what young girls probably should know about Karl Marx before they decide that they're going to embrace him and his ideology. So,
that's right.
Book. Yeah, go ahead, tell me.
Yeah, I have. I have quite a bit in my new book, The Devil and Karl Marx, on Marx as a family man, Marx as a father. And when you read about Marx and his daughters, I mean, you think that this would be the stuff maybe of interest to teen girls reading Teen Vogue. None of this, of course, was in the article praising Marx, but Marx was very, very bad when it came to sexual relations, the raising of his daughters, his wife. He actually cheated on his wife with the family nursemaid. The nursemaid's name was Lenchen. That was at least her nickname. And she started living with the Marx family, Jennifer, when she actually grew up with Marx's wife, Jenny. Her name was Jenny. And they were the Jenny's family lent her to the Marx family because Karl Marx, as Marx's wife said, and as Marx's own mother said, they wished that Karl would earn some capital rather than just writing about capital, right? So the man was broke. He never had any money, never could put a roof over the family's head, refused to work, refused to bathe, refused to groom, drank too much. The man was just a complete wreck. So the Jenny's family sent the family nursemaid, who had been a nursemaid to Jenny's family, grew up with Jenny since Jenny was a little girl, sent Jenny to live with the Marx family. and Jenny's family, Jenny's mom and dad, would pay for it because Karl couldn't afford to pay for it. So she became the family live-in nursemaid. And Marx at one point either raped her. We don't know if it was consensual or not. I've always assumed that it probably was consensual. I was surprised to see some Marx biographers, including Robert Payne, who think that it might not have been consensual. And at the least, as Payne and others say, she was like a bond slave to Marx, didn't pay her a dime, didn't pay her, the champion of the proletariat, right, the working class, didn't pay her a dime. And so at one point, he slept with, had sex with Lenchen. He gave birth to a baby boy, and the baby boy's name eventually given was Freddie, named after Friedrich Engels. Marx's partner, Engels, took responsibility, paternity, and claimed that the child was his, and did this in order to bail out Karl Marx yet again and to try to save Marx's marriage. But Marx refused to acknowledge the existence of this child, refused to claim that the child was his, and refused to pay, of course, a penny of child support, nothing. And ironically, that boy, Freddie, lived longer than all the Marx children, Jennifer. I think he lived until almost 1920. All the other Marx children all died early, several of them before Marx did and before Marx's wife did. And two of the daughters died in suicide pacts with their husbands. Two husbands, two son-in-laws that Marx regarded as idiots, morons, called them all kinds of names. In fact, one of them, because he was partly Cuban, his name was Paul Lafargue, Marx referred to him as the gorilla or Negrillo because he had some Cuban blood in his veins. He had some Negro blood in his veins. And Marx, who was as much a proud evolutionist as he was an atheist, as was Engels, was very racist, very racist.
Yeah.
And here's a side of Marx. I mean, you talk about the cancel culture, right? Hey,
He'd been canceled a long time ago. He would have never made it on campus with that.
Yeah, would have never made it on campus. I mean, you would have students, banging on professors' doors that have busts of Marx in their office, right? Said, take that thing down, Marx, racist. They'd be pulling his statue down. And don't even get me going on the anti-Semitic stuff.
Oh, yeah.
The stuff he said about blacks, I mean, use the N-word all the time. When I went back and I reread my chapter on this in The Devil and Karl Marx, I saw all the uses of the N-word, Jenny, and I thought, it made me think again, should we have abbreviated that, right? Maybe, because it just strikes you as so offensive. But no, this is what he wrote in his letter. He didn't abbreviate it, right? You have to quote what the man said. And when you see it and you're offended, you should be offended. That's what he wrote. But so Marx's daughters married two guys. One of the guys was a scoundrel, kind of a lot like Marx, a womanizer, refused to earn a living, Edward Aveling. And that son-in-law actually bailed out on the suicide pact with Marx's daughter. So she took the poison right? He helped administer it, and
did.
then he decided not to.
Uh-huh.
And so in his case, the suicide pact wasn't fully consummated. And then he ran off with a younger girl and also inherited Marx's daughter's earnings and property and so forth. So really a sordid, ugly thing. And I connect this in the book to Marx and some of his horrific writings on the devil, some chilling stuff. He frequently wrote about suicide and even suicide pacts. So it would not be a surprise if the daughters had learned some of this from the old man who would walk around the house reciting Faust and Mephistopheles and all kinds of weird. He was a really sick. Karl Marx was a really sick, messed up man. Sorry, it's a little bit of a digression.
Well, no, but that's okay. I think it's good to set the record straight, at least a little bit. Now I doubt very seriously that the editors of Teen Vogue are going to come over here and check us out. Although, if we make the Southern Poverty Law Center mad enough at us, maybe they will come over and look at it. They've been leaving me alone lately, by the way, so if there's somebody monitoring my stuff, hey, how are you? Listen in, I'm talking about you right now. But I try to be mindful that they might be watching and listening in, because they need to know. They've probably got some millennials doing their work for them, going through and checking out the people that they want to embarrass or humiliate. And I think they figured out that if they flag me for anything, they're not going to get away with just taking one sentence, because I'm going to come back at them and say, watch the whole thing, listen to the whole thing, which they don't want.
Yes.
Which they don't want, So far, for a while, they're leaving me alone. Maybe I'm losing my edge, Paul. Maybe I'm not as dangerous as I used to be.
Well, if I may add this, I've written a couple of articles for American Spectator called "Cultural Marxism and Its Conspirators," and I talk about that as well in this book. And when you would type into Google the word cultural Marxism, what would pop up was anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. And that just started like a year ago. And it's really, when I first saw that, Jennifer, I was blown away. I thought, whoa, who said this? I've been writing about this topic for 20 or 30 years. Where did this come from, right? Where did this come from? And somebody just put it in Google. And if you actually follow the Google clicks and Wikipedia and everything else, it goes to Wilhelm Reich and Herbert Marcuse and these Marxists who specialized in culture and sexuality and so forth. It's just a bizarre thing. So I wrote a couple articles on it. And after complaining about this enough, and by the way, getting in trouble myself from somebody who did that and then wrote a letter to the Grove City College president and board of trustees accusing me of anti-Semitic conspiracy theory because I wrote about cultural Marxism. Right. Yeah, and I told my students when I first saw that, I said, you know what, we're all going to get hit with this now. Anybody who wrote on this subject is going to get hit with this now. And if they would have just done a little deeper Google look, Paul Kengor, cultural Marxism, they would have seen my original American Spectator article writing about cultural Marxism and conspiracy theory, right? But so I wrote a follow-up piece on that. And guess what? Google changed it. Google actually fixed it. However, somebody emailed me just a couple of days ago. I haven't looked yet. They said, well, guess what? Now the Southern Poverty Law Center lists cultural Marxism as an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. And I thought, oh, great.
Oh my gosh.
So if you guys from the Southern Poverty Law Center, if you're listening right now, and I mean this, I'm smiling, all right? This is an olive branch. I mean this in a happy, supportive way. Talk to me. I'm happy to work with you on this issue, walk you through this. Some people, it appears on the extreme right, do peddle it that way, although I've never looked at their websites because I don't read that garbage, all right? But if you want some help from somebody who spent a lifetime reading all those books and reading all that stuff, I'm happy to help you. I'll do it for free. I don't want any credit. I just want truth to be revealed. And you've got to be careful with this because there's a lot of people, including on your side. And in fact, I noticed that Occidental College has now taken cultural Marxism out of the description in its Department of Critical Theory and Social Justice. Why have they taken it out? Because their friends on the left have suddenly started referring to it as an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. So there's a lot of writers on the left who are going to get tagged with this too because of misrepresentation of people's ignorance of the full history of what this really is. So, SPLC, if you're listening, honestly, I'm happy to.
So people, there is a thing that was cultural Marxism.
Right,
That's the thing. There is a group of people, the Frankfurt School. If you put in Frankfurt School, would that come up as an anti-Semitic?
It did, yeah. That's the funny thing. If you go to the same Google Wikipedia search, and you type in Frankfurt School, there it uses phrases like cultural Marxism. Or if you type in Antonio Gramsci, who was the Italian. Right, and by the way, sorry, my lights are blinking in here. I don't know why that's doing that.
You've angered the tech gods somehow.
I think I have.
Okay.
That, or in all honesty, my son's jumping up and down in the bedroom upstairs. But if you follow some of these other links that they provide, including if you Google Antonio Gramsci at Wikipedia and some of these other things, it lays out all of his work applying Marx to culture, cultural hegemony. And so I walk through this in those articles for American Spectator. SPLC, if you're listening and you're monitoring this, go to my 2 articles at the American Spectator, Cultural Marxism and its Conspirators, Part 1 and Part 2. Read through that and contact me. I'm serious. I'm happy to help.
Right.
Anyway.
This is truly, this revolution is devouring itself, right?
Yes.
Because these are their guys.
That's right.
You know, I mean, the Southern Poverty Law Center and many aspects of what we understand as the modern left, and certainly the sexual revolutionary left wing, that wouldn't be what it is without the work of Gramsci and others of the what are we allowed to call it now? That school of thought that shall go unnamed. That group of people, right? Without them laying the groundwork, you guys, you'd have nothing. There wouldn't be critical gender.
Well, that's right. And if you don't want to call it, cultural Marxism, okay, then let's call it Marxism applied to culture. Okay, would that be better? Right? But as you know from a lifetime of being an academic, right? There are cultural Marxists. There are sexual Marxists.
Right,
there are gender Marxists. Right. There's all kinds of these different groups, and I know you probably want to talk about him, Wilhelm Reich, who wrote the book, The Sexual Revolution, and coined the term, the sexual revolution. He was so radical on sexuality that the Bolsheviks didn't want anything to do with him.
That's right. Yeah, and that's a point that people should be aware of, that in the early days, the Bolsheviks were a little bit more tame than you might think.
Right.
Because they saw that it was so disruptive. So it's true that the Soviets had a no-fault divorce, but they quickly backpedaled from that because it was so destructive, and they couldn't get anything done. You know, the things they really wanted to get done at that point, didn't help. And didn't what was that lady's name? Kollontai, what's her name? You know,
Alexandra Kollontai. Right.
That's the lady. But didn't Lenin think that she was like this free love stuff? This is bourgeois. This is too undisciplined. A good disciplined comrade should be in command of themselves and not.
Yeah, and she was applying Marxism to the home, to women, to housework, and stuff that Engels and Marx actually did write about. But a lot of what she wrote about would be picked up by people like Kate Millett, who wrote Sexual Politics. She was called the Mao Zedong of the women's movement by Time magazine.
I want to get back to her because you got some really hot stuff about Kate Millett later on. But
she was a sexual Marxist, and they were applying Marxism to sexuality. And Wilhelm Reich and Herbert Marcuse and the Frankfurt School guys, they were trying to create a fusion, right? They're trying to fuse Freudian thought and Marxist thought. So they were Freudian Marxists of all things. And Wilhelm Reich in the Sexual Revolution, I've read the book. He talks about the genital stimulation of infants, and he's looking at it through a Marxist Freudian perspective. And people listening now are like, boy, that's weird. Even the Bolsheviks thought it was weird. Okay, it is weird. And for people like the Southern Poverty Law Center, okay, and you hear the stuff and you think, oh, that's crazy. I know it's crazy. Go read the stuff. That's exactly right. So when you hear it for the first time and it strikes you as odd, don't think that, these conservative people are making this up because I don't know what this is. Contact the people before you criticize them and ask them about it. We can help walk you through some of this stuff. The Sexual Revolution, that book has been out for 90 years.
Right.
I mean, come on.
Right. And he, it was the consumer product safety people who finally did him in, if I'm not mistaken, because
That's right.
He claimed he had this machine that could take, it's not orgasm, it's a word that sounds like orgasm, but it isn't orgasm. There was something in the atmosphere that his machine could take in, and then you would be happy or something, and the FDA is like,
Right.
And I mean,
Woody Allen made, remember in the
Yeah.
movie The Sleeper, it's like I think the Orgasmatron, I think it's called.
Yeah, something like that.
You go into this like box thing, and you come and then you come out. And it's funny, it's hilarious the way that Woody Allen portrays. By the way, Woody Allen, no liberal or no conservative, right? But eventually Wilhelm Reich got arrested for that, and he went to prison at what they call Club Fed in Lewisburg, which, by the way, Jennifer, is the same place where Alger Hiss went to prison. And I think it's also where Al Capone was as well. So yeah, Wilhelm Reich eventually got arrested for something different altogether. That's what often happens, right? I think they got Al Capone on tax evasion.
That's right.
But so they got Wilhelm Reich on something else altogether. Now, the guy who was really the sort of guru to the 60s New Left, the people like Kate Millett and the Weather Underground and SDS, Mark Rudd, Bill Ayers, Bernardine Dohrn, that was Herbert Marcuse.
Right.
And Marcuse is another guy who, again, SPLC, if you're listening, wrote Eros and Civilization, One Dimensional Man. He was doing a lot of, his Marxism was being applied as well in the sexual cultural realm. When you go and read a lot of these guys, they're not writing about tax cuts, right? A lot, they're not even often writing about class or workers'
industrial policy or anything like that.
Right.
That's right. And that's
sexual cultural stuff. That's where they're applying their Marxism.
And that's where I want to pause right here so people can get the full impact of this, of what Dr. Kenger is actually saying here. So their primary objective is sexual, not economic. What
Yes.
they're after is a world where they can do what they want sexually, whatever that might include. So they
Right.
weren't freaked out over income inequality or factory working conditions or anything like
Absolutely.
that. They had in their minds a sexual utopia. And so I'm trained in economics, so I'm well aware of free market economics versus Marxist economics and stuff. But it was only when I started really studying the family in a systematic way that I started to see, the sexual revolution is actually a totalitarian ideology. I started saying that, I don't know, probably about 10 years ago, I started saying this is a totalitarian ideology. Actually, I first called it a pagan ideology. And somebody straightened me out and said, the pagans were much more sensible than this. Aristotle would have never thought some of the stuff that they're talking about here. So I realized I took out the word pagan. This is a totalitarian ideology.
Well, and totalitarian in the sense that here too, people don't understand what a lot of this language means.
Yeah,
I lectured on totalitarianism at Grove City College since 1997. And in fact, it's probably, I think, my second week of classes in comparative politics. I write on the boards that Zbigniew Brzezinski and Carl Friedrich, their classic study on totalitarianism. You define it, you lay out the 7 characteristics. But totalitarianism in the classic sense refers to transforming human nature. Yeah, totalitarians can indeed be jackbooted thugs and people who ban freedom of speech, press, religion, and everything else. But in its basic systemic meaning, it means to transform human nature. And that's what many of the communists were in fact engaged in. And communism is a totalitarian ideology.
Right. And so I backed into that. What you just said, I'm like, oh, because I kind of figured that out on my own by looking at the sexual stuff. And what I came up with is that a totalitarian ideology is a soft power system to justify the accumulation of hard power. And if you look at the sexual revolution, and here's what got me going on it, Paul. The sexual revolution is gravely culpable in the sex abuse crisis that's going on in our culture. Gravely culpable.
Right,
And
right.
at first, I didn't want to see that. I didn't want to think about it because it's nasty.
Meaning the priestly sexual
The
abuse.
priest stuff, yeah, but the priest stuff's just the tip of the iceberg. You know, you got Harvey Weinstein, you got Jeffrey Epstein, you've got the United Nations, you got it. The global ruling class is deeply implicated in pedophilia across the board. They are. The Me Too girls are never going to get it because they're still committed to the ideology of the sexual revolution. They don't realize that that's disarming them, and it's empowering and emboldening the predators, right? It's
Yes.
You're saying to people, everybody's entitled to carefree sex. Nothing bad will happen. We're going to reorganize society so that nothing bad ever happens. We have this dream, this fantasy of unlimited sex for everyone. Okay, if that's what you start with, since that's a fantasy, it can't happen. It's not real. You know, so it's a remake of human nature, right?
Yes.
The vulnerable girl is being delivered into the hands of the predator and thinking, well, I guess it's supposed to be sex positive. I guess everybody says it's okay. You know, there's a kind of way that the victim is disarmed and the predator is, you know, even more emboldened because I have an entitlement. I'm entitled. It said so on the latest news. It said so on TV. You know, I'm entitled. And so the sexual revolutionary ideology, I think, is a grave culprit in all of this stuff. And we're not going to get rid of pedophilia. We're not going to get rid of sexual harassment until we go right at that ideological core.
Well,
and I've ended up doing that. I didn't really want to do that, but I can't avoid it anymore, you know?
Well, and it's the breakdown, the rejection as well of traditional moral absolutes, and the idea that the truth is relative, sexuality is relative, these practices are all relative, it's all up to the individual. And believe it or not, that goes back not only to some of the sexual Marxists and the cultural Marxists and people like Wilhelm Reich and Herbert Marcuse, Freudian Marxists, but that actually goes back to Marx and Engels as well. I mean, Marx in no way is thinking about homosexuality or same-sex marriage, although he's very anti-marriage, right? He writes about in the Communist Manifesto, the exact words are abolition of the family, ! Even the most radical flare up of this infamous proposal of the Marxists, of the communists. And Marx even wrote to Engels, he said, blessed is he who has no family. He told him, he said, if I could do it all over again, I would have chosen not to get married. And he told the one son-in-law, Paul Lafargue, the one that he referred to as Negrillo, he told him, he said that, why would you want to waste your life by getting married? And that's when Lafargue is considering marrying Marx's daughter, of all things. But Marx was at the very fundamentals of human nature. One of his favorite quotes was from Goethe, Faust, Mephistopheles, that said, everything that exists deserves to perish. Everything that exists deserves to perish. One of his favorite quotes, you can read it everywhere. He wrote to Arnold Rouge, he called for, quote, the ruthless criticism of everything that exists. The ruthless criticism of everything that exists. And in the very end of the Communist Manifesto, he said, he and Engels say that they will support every revolutionary movement that goes against the existing social and political order of things. So they really wanted to take down the Judeo-Christian roots of civilization, of Western civilization. So the people today who are kind of standing in their footprints and rejecting biblical absolutes, natural law, so forth, you name it, there's not to say that they're doing it because of Marx, but there's a continuity here, an intellectual continuity. And when Marx and Engels were writing that stuff in the 19th century, I mean, they had the Prussian German police spies after them. I mean, this was considered really crazy, radical stuff. You know, you can't reject that. But here we are in America today, and those ideas are pervasive throughout the West. And when people like me and you stand to thwart history, to quote William F. Buckley Jr. yelling halt, they frame us as the bad guys, us as the haters, us as the outliers, or the weirdos.
Right. So the way I've formulated it around the sexual stuff, I really am interested in the 7 characteristics of totalitarianism that you mentioned. That is
Sure.
that's kind of standard on the political science side. But,
Yeah.
But the way I have figured out to look at it is that this is a power grab. These ideologies are all power grabs. You start off promising heaven on earth. You promise some utopian thing that cannot work. So whether it's income equality, where everybody's going to be equal, or no one's going to die of COVID. If you just do what we say, no one's going to die of COVID. If you just do what we say, there will be no more racism. You know, if you just do what we say, you can have all the sex you want, and nothing bad will ever happen. So you put up a utopian ideal, which of course can never be achieved. All right. So then what you have to have is a savior class, a class of people who will make all this possible.
Yeah.
But what they need is power. They need a lot of power to do the impossible. That was a key thing that was a real breakthrough for me, Paul, when I was trying to debate marriage. The marriage question is like, this is crazy. But but they don't care that it's crazy. Me explaining that it can't work, that's never enough because they like it. They need more power to make it possible. And then number 4, they need propaganda, tons and tons of propaganda to divert people's attention from the failures, to suppress evidence that doesn't fit the pattern, to the people who are suffering from the sexual revolution, the people who have been harmed by the sexual revolution. You never see them on TV. You know, you never see a column devoted to the true story of my parents' divorce and how awful it was. Instead, you see jolly blended families, blended family bliss being promoted on the Huffington Post. So there's tons of propaganda has to be involved. And then finally, you've got to have a scapegoat. Because even with all that power, even with all that propaganda, you're still never going to get your dream. You know, the fantasy will never happen. So you got to blame somebody. And right now, we, the Christians, are public enemy number 1 because we're in the way. You know, we get to be the scapegoats. Because we keep saying, there are moral absolutes, actually. Actually, you don't get to do whatever you want just because you can get away with it. You know, we're the ones saying those troublesome things, so we're the scapegoat class. And if we would just go away, then everything would be okay.
Sure. Here, I'll read this quote to you. So this is from, I think, chapter 12 of my book. Both classical Marxists and cultural Marxists see history as a series of struggles that divide the world into hostile, antagonistic groups of oppressors and the oppressed, right? Both seek out victim groups as the anointed group that will also serve as society's redeemer group. So the victim group becomes the agent for emancipation and ushering in the new and better world. The Marxists must always then be on the search for the newest victim class, which in turn must always be made aware of its victimization. Now that's key, right? Consciousness must be raised. In classical Marxism, this was simple. The victim group was identified by class or economics. So that group, Jennifer, was the proletariat. It was the factory worker. In cultural Marxism, this has not been so simple because the culture is always changing. The victim group is constantly being searched for anew by the cultural Marxists. So one year, the victim group might be women. The next year, it might be African Americans. The next year, another group. Today, there's a hard push by cultural Marxists to tap, and People's World uses this label, LGBTQIA+, right? People's World uses that full label. The plus is really key,
Right.
as the champion victim group. So that would include lesbians, gays, bisexuals, transgender, queer persons, intersexual, asexuals, and on and on. Thus, a leading cultural Marxist like Angela Davis, who is the student to Herbert Marcuse, could stand at the 2017 Women's March in Washington, D.C., before a sea of oblivious girls wearing pink hats modeled after their genitalia, and recite a litany of politically correct grievances. Now, note this, Jennifer. Angela Davis, in her casting about for victim groups, this is somebody who was awarded, I think it was the Stalin Peace Prize by the Soviets. Right?
Isn't that nice?
She did not quote Marx and Lenin. All right. Instead, she talked about Chelsea Manning, trans women of color. These are exact quotes. Our flora and fauna, intersectional feminism, denounce white male heteropatriarchy, keep in mind, she ran for president of the United States, vice president of the United States on the Communist Party USA ticket twice. Misogyny, Islamophobia, and capitalist exploitation. Victims, victims, victims. So the point there, like you said, is it's this constant, never-ending search for the next victim group that will be like the Redeemer group, right?
That's right. That's right.
It's this group that will usher in the utopia. So for Marx and Engels, it was class, it was economics, it was proletariat, it was the factory worker. And the Frankfurt School guys like Max Horkheimer and Theodor Adorno, SPLC, if you actually read their books, so you know what you're talking about. All right, they use phrases like cultural workers. If you go to the About section of People's World right now, go to the About section of People's World. That's the flagship publication for the Communist Party USA. It's the successor to the Daily Worker. Go to the About section. Go in the About section, look at it. There's a call there for cultural workers. For cultural workers.
Means what?
So they're looking for workers not to organize the factory floor at the steel mill. They've given up on that. That's 50, 100 years ago, right? They're not looking for the farmers. That's done. They're not looking for the West Virginia coal miner. Those guys all voted for Trump, right? They're looking for the cultural worker. That's who they're looking for. And so these are Marxists looking for cultural workers.
Who do they mean? When they say cultural workers, what does that mean?
Well, in their case, it's for people engaging in work to transform the culture. And for them, the culture means really the stuff that we're talking about, sexual issues, moral issues, what you and I as conservatives and what liberals too would judge as cultural issues.
Okay.
And in fact, if you go, I'll make it even easier. If you go to the About section of People's World, they spell that stuff out. And it's just like what Angela Davis said. The cultural issues, she's talking about Chelsea Manning, intersexual feminism, LGBTQIA. That's what they mean by these cultural issues. Even abortion, none of which Marx and Engels, if you even use these words to Marx and Engels, they'd be like, intersectional what? Right? LGBT, what? Trans, what? They wouldn't have any idea. But that's where the movement has progressed to.
But they would have recognized the pattern. They would have recognized the pattern of the savior class and victimization and the scapegoat class and all of that. They would have.
Yes, and there's that key line at the end of the Communist Manifesto. It may be the line that really redounds to the ages. Right? Marxists everywhere support every revolutionary movement. They say every revolutionary movement that goes against the existing social and political order of things. So Marx and Engels, after being completely shocked, and you might have to help them off the floor with smelling salts when you tell them about what's going on in the culture today. It might take them a week to come to their senses, but after you explain to them what LGBTQIA is and what same-sex marriage and everything is, if you said to them, now here's a revolutionary movement, guys, right? Like you said at the end of the manifesto, here's a revolutionary movement that can really undermine the existing social and political order of things. They would have said,
gotcha.
That can be useful. That can be useful.
It demands the transformation of human nature.
It does. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
And if you look at what the pattern is, it's going deeper and deeper into human nature, so that it's not just your work. It's now how you relate to the opposite sex by undermining marriage. It's how you connect to your own children, and now it's how you connect to your own body. That's the significance of the
and it means first and foremost you've got to take down God.
He's been gone a long time.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your book.
God in the church, right?
You
got to take down the forces that say, listen, there is an absolute truth.
That's right.
There are 10 commandments. There are beatitudes. There's a biblical law and a natural law, and it says no, you're not allowed to do that with your body. So the Marxist realizes, okay, how do we convince people that? Well, we tell them God doesn't exist, right? There is no God. Religion is the opiate of the people, right? As Lenin said, quote, there is no God. So they have to go after God and they have to go after the church.
Now, but Pope Benedict made a very interesting observation at his Regensburg address, and I think you know where I'm going with this. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
which is that not all religions are the same. On the very point that you mentioned, there is a view within some religions, even within some branches of Christianity, that say God's will is the only defining point of what's right and wrong, that God could change his mind about what's right and wrong. And Benedict got into a lot of trouble because he said that this is basically the Islamic view. But the traditional Orthodox Catholic view, and by Orthodox I mean both East and West, I think agree on this point.
Orthodox.
Small O Orthodox Catholic Orthodoxy is that God can't just make up stuff. That God is in a sense constrained. He's not really constrained, but by the nature of who he is, he cannot will something that is evil. So there is something that is good, that is permanent. And you're not going to talk God out of it, or God's not going to change his mind or something. There are permanent good things, there are permanent bad things. And that's the religion that's got to go. If you're going to remake human nature, that's what's got to go. If you got somebody over here saying, well, my God can make stuff up as he goes along, that guy, you can live with that guy. You know, you can accommodate that guy in your system. Sure. But these guys saying naturalist, this Aquinas guy, man, he's got to go. You know, that's a big problem to say that.
That's right. Anybody who supports the idea of fixed absolutes,
that's right.
Right? That's what's got to be targeted. And they went after, in particular, and that's why in the subtitle of the book I use the word infiltration and manipulation, because there actually was attempts to infiltrate the churches. And in particular, they, meaning communists in the United States, I mean, also, I give examples from Russia, Eastern Europe, you name it. But in the United States, Communist Party USA, they targeted the mainline denominations. Now, they targeted the Catholic Church as well, and I've got a full chapter on that, but they had their greatest success with the Episcopal Church, the Methodist Church, and the Presbyterian Church, so the mainline denominations, in particular the Methodist Church, and that was because of not Methodists en masse, but mainly because of Harry Ward, who was a really radical pastor. And by the way, one of the co-founders of the ACLU, along with Roger Baldwin. Roger Baldwin of the ACLU actually wrote a 1929 book called Liberty Under the Soviets. That's the founder of the ACLU, right? Liberty under the Soviets, not liberty under the U.S. Constitution, liberty under the Soviets. But Harry Ward was a radical Methodist minister, and they had very troubling success, very shocking success in penetrating the mainline denomination.
So, yeah, I was shocked this part you had about Harry Ward and the Methodists. I mean, that was heartbreaking, really.
Yes.
And this is the denomination where, if I'm not mistaken, you straighten me out if I'm wrong here. If I'm not mistaken, these are the very denominations which, in the last, 10 or 15 years, all voted in favor of redefining marriage within their traditions. And the faithful ended up going to Africa to put themselves under the authority of African bishops.
Yeah, that's the Anglican Church. That's right.
Anglican,
the American Anglican branch with the Episcopal Church. That's exactly right. And I used to be a Presbyterian, so I was in Presbyterian Church USA, and it is it's quite interesting. And I won't say that it's coincidence or not a coincidence, or that A led to B led to C, but the groups where the communists went after, the Episcopal Church, the Methodist Church, and the Presbyterian Church, the initial American Presbyterian Church, not the capital O Orthodox or the Reformed Calvinists. They were the ones to go furthest left first. And remember, it was the Episcopal Church that first did birth control. Right?
Oh,
and I think probably also first did gay ordination and also same-sex marriage as well. Here was Browder admitting to Union Theological Seminary, right? You might be surprised to know that we have preachers. We have preachers who are actual members of our party.
Yes, and that was one of the surprising things in your book, is just how deeply entrenched some of those people really were.
And they talked too, Manning Johnson, I quote him, a wonderful, brilliant ex-communist, African-American, probably almost like a Whittaker Chambers type. He really needs to be more appreciated for what he did. And I quote in there a number of times Manning Johnson and others saying how it astounded him when he was in the party. You could get 1% of a membership that could control the other 99%. He said we could get, and Bella Dodd, who talks about the infiltration of the Catholic Church, and as she put it, putting, quote, over 1,000 communist men in Catholic seminaries, unquote. But the idea that you could take 5 or 10 people and get them and have them get control of an organization of 10,000, and those 5 to 10 could control the direction of that organization. Manning Johnson and others, they were astounded at how a kind of a tight-knit group of working very secretly, but very strategically, very shrewdly, a tight cadre like that could control the overall organization. And we've seen this so many times throughout American culture and history.
That's right. And you know what's interesting to me is how reluctant conservatives are to learn that lesson. That if you had, by analogy, by extension, you would think if you had a handful of people who were devoted to steering an organization towards Judeo-Christian principles, that you ought to be able to get that done too.
Right.
We somehow, you ought to be able to get that done, but we don't think like that. We spend too much time kind of in self-pity.
Right.
Look at how they're overrunning us and how strong they are and so on. And we don't realize that. Well, they've been working on it for a long time.
And look at a group too, like we probably don't want to talk about this too much, but Black Lives Matter, right? Where and the two people who run it, Patrisse Cullors and Alicia Garza, and Patrisse Cullors has said, we are trained Marxist organizers, myself and Alicia, right? We are well versed in those ideological theories. So that might be where they're coming from, but yet with a brilliant slogan like Black Lives Matter. I mean, who could be against? Who could say that Black lives don't matter, right? That's brilliant sloganeering, right? So because we all agree that small b, right? Black Lives Matter, lowercase, right? We all agree with that. But they're able to bring to their organization, I don't know how many followers do they have. They got to be the most popular organization in the United States. And if you go to their website, the About section talks about how they are against the, quote, Western prescribed nuclear family structure. And it includes words like heteronormative, queer, comrades, words like that, which have nothing to do with George Floyd or police reform or even Black issues.
Right.
So these two women who are against the Western prescribed nuclear family structure, who are trained Marxist organizers, are able to push that agenda on the very same website where they're bringing in tens of millions of supporters under the broader cause that nobody can disagree with, right? The Black Lives Matter. So it's the far left is very, very good at this. They've done this for 100 years.
And what's interesting to me about that is the sloganeering. I want to pause on the sloganeering thing that you mentioned, because we've had to confront that in dealing with marriage issues and human sexuality issues.
Yeah.
Things we deal with at the Ruth Institute. Very early on, the pro-life movement understood that they needed to get a grip on the words. And so they call themselves pro-life. They don't allow themselves to be called anti-abortion and so on. They've been very intentional about that. But I can't think of any other part of the social conservative network that has been equally attentive. And we have tried to be attentive about it. So at some point, I started saying to people, you must never use the term gay marriage. There is no such thing as a gay marriage. We can't use that term. You cannot use the term marriage equality. As soon as you start talking like that, you're carrying water for the other side, And so that, and yet no one, in all the years that America has been struggling over race, no one has sat down and said, the language around race is really important. We need to get a grip on it. We need to, how do we express ourselves? How do we express what we believe in language that compels people to agree with us?
Yeah, and when they use the term marriage equality, I knew that was it. I said, that's it. They've won, right?
Yeah. And that's where we chose to fight. Okay, so one of my colleagues wrote a little booklet called Marriage and Equality, spelling out how children would be unequal if we went down this path. All the new inequalities that would be entered. But of course, we never had a big enough megaphone to be able to compete with what was out there. But when people did use our stuff and did use our language, it helped, but we couldn't compete on the volume level, It troubles me, Paul. It really troubles me that nobody on our side is willing to say. Everybody says, "Oh, Black Lives Matter. I agree with Black Lives Matter, but I don't agree with this over here." Well, no, you can't even do that. You can't. You've got to ignore their stuff completely, because the minute it's like a specially designed weapon that when they hold it, it kills you. When you pick it up, it kills you. You don't want to pick it up. You just have to ignore their language and go on making the point that you want to make, the way you want to make it, and don't. It's like when conservatives will say, "Oh, I don't hate homosexuals. I'm not really a hate."
Right.
That's pointless. It's pointless to even say that, And in the process, you're repeating their talking point. Oh, hate. Oh, yeah, hate. Yeah, it's like it's worse.
Yeah.
It's worse than useless.
No, that's right.
That troubles me quite a bit. That we're not sufficiently attentive to that, because we're getting our hats handed to us. There's one point I want to talk about that I've never heard anybody else talk about. I don't know if this Black Lives Matter stuff is going to survive the cut, but we'll see. But I want to ask you about the family specifically. Now, you and I know that going all the way back to Engels, the Marxists have hated the family. I think it's very interesting how literally every totalitarian movement you can think of attacks the family. And I would like for you and I together to kind of lay out why we think that is. Why do they have to get rid of the family? Why do they have to undermine the family if they're trying to get done whatever their totalitarian fantasy might be? Where does that come from, Paul?
Yeah, well, here I would quote anyone from Pope John Paul II to Ronald Reagan, and they said that the family is the foundation, the nucleus of society, right? It all starts at that very basis. So, first things first. What is the foundation? God, family, property rights, and those are all the things that they realize that if you're going to fundamentally transform human nature, you've got to whack at that root. That's what they had to go after, and they realized that the family was utterly essential to that. If you want a complete revolution, then you need to take down what Kate Millett and others would term the patriarchal society. And you think about that too, Jennifer, the very idea that they use the term patriarchal society. Why do you have to call it that, right? All they're talking about there is a society with men and women in marriages, and they have to tag it with this label, right? They even do you as an economist, they even do this with free markets, right? They have to call it capitalism, right? Like it's an ism. We're really just people like me and you. We just support the free exchange of goods and services in an economy with less government regulation, right? We don't consider ourselves capitalists, right? Like the opposite of a Marxist, or we're not engaging in capitalism. I don't like it when our Pope does that either, because it's just it's called free markets. That's what I support. I support freedom. But
let's go back to the patriarchy. Let's go back to the patriarchy because one of the things about the patriarchy is that and let's look at the word feminist itself. The word feminist has ideology baked into it.
Yes.
That's another word you'll never hear come out of the Ruth Institute. We're not for or against feminism. We just leave it alone. We just leave that alone, because you pick it up, it blows up in your face. You don't know what anybody means when they say feminism. But baked into it is the idea that the interests of men and the interests of women are necessarily in conflict. Baked into it is the idea that whoever is a feminist now has the right to speak for all women, which is absurd. Normal people don't think like that.
Yes.
Right? And so, but what the patriarchy does is there's the natural authority figure of the father in each and every home. There is a natural authority figure. And if you can undermine that natural authority figure and take him out, the promise is that you're going to be more free because he's gone. But actually what's going to happen is you're going to be a sitting duck for some bastard who cares much less about you and your child than your husband ever would have. Okay, so now you're at the mercy of your employer. You're at the mercy of your daycare provider. You're at the mercy of the social worker who's in charge of whether you receive services. You're at the mercy of the next ideologue who comes knocking on the door. the women and children are sitting ducks once you remove the father from the family. And when you think about that and think about how systematically the father has been removed from the family, it can't be an accident, Paul. It can't be an accident.
Right.
Economically, culturally, socially, the TV, everybody either attacks or ridicules the father until people think, well, we don't need what do we need a father for? What do we need a man for? You know, and by the time you figure out for yourself what you need a man for, it's too late to do anything about it. You're a single mom with a 14-year-old son who's bigger than you are that you can't handle. Right? And trust me, I've heard this story many times, Paul,
yes.
many times, you know, and as soon as you say that, these poor women in the audience are like, yeah, that's exactly where we are, you know?
Right.
It's not good for anyone. It's not good for the child. It's not good for her. It's not good for the father, who's often about disconnected from the things that really make him really a man, you know, and that allow him to have his full flourishing as a man. It isn't good for anyone, but that's the ideology is levering out the authority, the competing authority figure. To me, that's what they're doing.
Well, and so taking out the patriarchal society or taking out the patriarch means declaring it evil or describing it in a way that suggests that it's evil, right?
That's right.
So you know, a society where you have predominantly father-headed households, intact families, whatever, right? Where maybe the mom works, maybe the father works, maybe the mother stays at home, but you've got to declare that as evil. Right. Now, one of the things that I hit on in this book, and I know you wanted to talk about this, Kate Millett, who was considered the Mao Zedong of the women's movement, wrote the book Sexual Politics, which was her dissertation at Columbia. I think, Jennifer, we don't give enough credit to this. Mallory Millett, who was Kate's sister. Yeah, who I know, I email with frequently. I interviewed her for this book. She's quoted at length. And one of the things that she says, she said, you know, the one thing I'll never get over is that my sister, who was crazy, she said, I mean, like certifiably insane. I mean, Mallory believes that Kate was crazy. And by the way, Mallory believes that Kate may have been demonically possessed.
Yes.
But I remember her telling me, Jennifer, I'm driving down the turnpike, and she said, "Well, at the end of my days, I will never understand. My sister was crazy, and she wrote a book that was crazy. And within 2 or 3 years, it was required reading in every university in America. And I wanted to walk into these classrooms and grab a hold of these professors, who today we'd probably call them woke, right? And just shake them and say, do you know who wrote this book? You need to meet her. She's crazy, right? This is somebody who you should not be listening to what she's writing." But yet that was the influence that she had. And I was really struck when Kate's sister was telling me this, because when I read Sexual Politics, I had the same reaction that I had when I read Marcuse's Eros and Civilization, One-Dimensional Man. I thought, this is impenetrable. I don't even know what they're saying here. I can find certain things here and there, like, okay, patriarchy, bad. Got it. All right. Okay. Sexual liberation, good. Okay. There's a quote that says that. Got. But a lot of times you're reading these, entire page, one paragraph, kind of meandering, long rambling, and you say to yourself, what in the world are these people even talking about? And this is considered like a classic that started a revolution, right? This is the work of maniacs in some cases. Certainly that's true for Wilhelm Reich's The Sexual Revolution.
Right.
And yet these books they end up, and in fact, while I'm at it, for young people listening who say, oh yeah, if you just read the Communist Manifesto, it's a pretty good book.
They haven't read it. They haven't read it.
Like, right? Yeah. Pick it up and read it. It's about that thick, all right? It's you could get through it in probably a night. If you read that thing, you'll come away from that thinking, these two guys, first of all, they don't know anything about economics. Nothing about economics, right? I don't think they know anything about human nature. I don't think they know anything about reality. If you try to do the things in this book, you're going to have to kill 100 million people. This is one of the craziest things I've ever read in my life. And the idea that could have the influence that it's had, 170 plus years henceforth, is like Mallory said about Kate Millett. It's incredibly frustrating. It really is.
Right. And I thought that when I read that part of your book, the first thing that jumped out at me was that her book, The Sexual Politics, was on the cover of Time magazine.
Yeah.
So now you ask yourself, somebody inside Time magazine made a decision to put that book on the cover.
Right.
Somebody made a decision to do that. And that's the person I'd like to get inside their mind. Okay.
Yes.
Find that Kate Millett was crazy. But there's always crazy people. Who picks out the crazy people and puts them on the cover of Time magazine?
Right.
Who gives them a microphone? And what are they thinking? And so my theory, I don't know if this is true. Obviously, you can't know that this is true. But people who want to get away with something, it needs something that's kind of obfuscated, because if they just blurt it out, hey, what I really want to do is have sex with anybody I want to and have nothing bad ever happen.
Right.
They just blurted that, and children, I really don't care about children or what happens to them. They'll be fine. They just have to accept whatever I choose to give them. If somebody
Sure.
blurted that out, they wouldn't be able to. You couldn't just blurt that out, right? But that's approximately our position right now. That's where we are as a culture. So in order to get there, you have to have something that's like a whole cloud. It can't be straightforward. It has to have obfuscation all around it.
Yeah.
But it has to have, like a pretty rainbow painted on the front of it so that it looks
Sure.
nice. And that's
Well,
it.
and
That's the formula.
a lot of times it's people who, and just to kind of I don't know if cowardly is the right word, but just to be understanding, they're like, well, okay, let's put this on the cover of the magazine, right? Maybe they don't even agree with it, right? But they put it out there, and that allows it to happen. I was trying to think of an analogy to something else like that today. Probably a lot of examples today, but go ahead. I'll think of it.
Okay, so somebody inside Teen Vogue made a decision.
Yes.
To write a cover story about anal sex for
Right.
And somebody decided to do that. So I think we're not going to get to the bottom of all of this today, but we're coming to the end of our time together. So the people who are watching this program, the thing that I would advise you to be on the lookout for is I would advise you to be on the lookout for anybody who's promising you heaven on earth. If anybody's promising you heaven on earth, they're either a fool or a liar, and in neither case should you be following them. That's your clue that something is about to go wrong. And whatever decorations they paste on it, that's not important.
There's a great statement that I quote from Pope Benedict XVI, who talking about Christ being tempted by Satan, right? And Christ telling Satan, man does not live on bread alone. And the mistake of Marx and Engels was that they saw man in strictly material ways. And as Benedict said, they believe that if you solve the economic problem, you solve the human problem, you solve the problem of suffering. But no, the problem is man doesn't live on bread alone. But as Christ told Satan, right, on every word from the mouth of God. So that's a mistake that's repeated right there. When you get your diagnosis wrong, when you get your framework wrong, when you look at everything through the eyes of materialism, wealth, property, bread, then you're probably going to get your ideology wrong as well.
Right. Dr. Kager, is there any website or activity of yours that people should go follow? You have a center there at Grove City College. Why don't you tell me?
We do, yes. So our center, it's called the Institute for Faith and Freedom. It used to be called the Center for Vision and Values, but it's now called the Institute for Faith and Freedom. And we've hosted Jennifer Roback Morris twice, at least, to packed houses. I also write for the American Spectator. I have a column there, spectator.org. I write frequently for Crisis Magazine, National Catholic Register. And you can find my books at Amazon. Just type in Paul Kengor, and there's an Amazon page for me. And this one, The Devil and Karl Marx, so it's released in August of 2020.
Okay.
So there we go.
Wait, do I have one of the very first copies?
You do. You have one of the first copies.
All right, then. And you can see it's all banged up. I've been dragging it around for the past week so I could read it in anticipation of this interview. So, Paul Kengor, thank you so much for being with us today. It was really an enjoyable conversation, and I'm sure that our viewers are going to be really blessed by listening to us go at it the way we did.
Well,
today,
you're doing the Lord's work, and thank you for all that you do. I mean that sincerely.
Well, thank you so much, Paul.
All right. Take care.
You've been listening to the Dr. J Show, a production of the Ruth Institute. The Ruth Institute equips Christians to defend the family and build a civilization of love. Check out our website at ruthinstitute.org for helpful resources and support. Join us on Facebook. Our podcasts can also be found online at ruthinstitute.org. I'm Father Mark Hodges. Thank you for watching.